Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I'm John Macri, joined, as always, by Nate, the great Jahnke. Nate, we continue to kind of creep toward the fantasy draft season, which means that, we kind of have to be locked in and getting all of our rankings in order for one of the busiest times of the year and one of the most important times of the year for fantasy, which is why today we are going to run through our 2025 running back rankings. I'm really looking forward to this one. How about you?
Yeah, so looking forward. We're getting closer and closer. Yesterday, I finished the rough draft of all the player profiles I plan on writing this year. I'm sure I'll have another random player or two that emerges in August that I'll end up writing about, but all the ones that I planned on writing about from months ago, I have now written the draft for. So I was excited for that. And then have the Scott Fishbowl live draft in Cincinnati this weekend. So for me, I am already having my first redraft draft, and it's only late June, mid-June.
Wow. Okay. There you go. So I think I saw something that format this year is including the IDP points for Travis Hunter. Are you considering Travis Hunter 101?
I am not going to divulge my strategy because I might have the people in my league listening. Fair. I want to make sure that I get the players that I want to get, because if I say I want Travis, then someone else is going to get Travis, and I can't have that.
Good point. Yeah, I apologize for bringing it up. I just thought that was interesting, for sure.
It was nice to see, yes.
Yeah. All right, but yeah, today we're going to be talking running back rankings, right? And not necessarily going spot for spot, talking about who we have 1, 2, 3, etc. Because we've actually talked quite a bit about some of the players who we have higher in the rankings over the last few weeks, specifically our running back ADP battles episode. We talked about, I think the first 4 guys on there for sure. So instead today, what we're going to do is we're going to focus more on some of the running backs that we haven't spent a lot of time on just yet this offseason, that is, to kind of highlight some of maybe either our differences in our own rankings, where we're different from ADP, interesting names that just maybe deserve a little bit more attention, things like that. So let's get right into it. And funny enough, we have a number of differences in our rankings. We both have Bijan Robinson at 1, Jahmyr Gibbs at 2, Saquon Barkley at 3, and Ashton Jeanty at 4. And like I said, we've talked about these guys a fair bit already and laid out our rationale of them in the running back ADP battles episode. Again, you could go back and listen to that now. So instead, we won't spend a lot of time on these guys. Instead, what we'll do is we'll move to this next kind of tier / grouping of running backs, and your RB5 specifically, Nate, my RB6, Christian McCaffrey. Now, obviously, a healthy CMC is without question a top 5 running back, arguably even higher, right? Even at this point in his career. And for the most part, it seems like he's on the right track to get back to that form, Nate. So as much as I only have one player ahead of him compared to you, there's no doubt that CMC is still an elite weapon for fantasy. So what are your thoughts heading into 2025 on him?
Yeah, so right now he is definitely a player on the rise. It sounds like he is healthy. All the reports on him have been positive over this past month or so. So I have moved him up the rankings here to 5. I think it will be interesting to see how the 49ers use him with all the injuries he's had. If they continue to have the same amount of workload he's had in the past, that's probably where my primary concern is just a slight decrease in carries or routes run could be a problem. Also, at least slightly concerned about the offensive line. I still think it's going to be a very good offensive line, but Trent Williams isn't getting any younger. He did have declined a little bit. He's still a very good left tackle, despite being, I believe, the oldest left tackle in the NFL right now. And then they also lost Aaron Banks, which they should be fine enough without him, but it's still a player that they lost who was decent last year. But for me, a big thing is, even though I have him 5, I have the 4 guys I have ahead of him. Right now, if you go to a place like ESPN, he is a late first-round pick. I think he's the 8th player on the list. And when I'm deciding who I want to pick late in the first round, I'm probably going to lean in a different direction. There's a number of wide receivers that are going after Christian McCaffrey. Guys like Malik Neighbors, Nico Collins, Brian Thomas Jr., all guys that we are excited about for this year, all young and upcoming wide receivers. And I probably would rather have one of those wide receivers who I feel like I can trust to be a big asset to my team the entire season, compared to McCaffrey, which it feels like it's the binary. Either he's going to be injured and miss a lot of time, or he's going to be the same CMC who has been some of the best fantasy seasons we've seen out of a running back, but I think there is that gray area in between that he just might not be as good as he was with the injuries at his age, with how much he's gone throughout his career. I think all of that's possible, that he could be healthy the entire season and not be one of the top 5 fantasy running backs.
Yeah, it's definitely possible, right? Like people were burned in the worst way by CMC last year, because he was often drafted as a top 3 player in fantasy, and obviously didn't come anywhere near that because of the injuries appearing in just 4 games, right? So there's going to be people, I guarantee it, where, fantasy drafters want no part of him for 2025. But I'm not one of them. I still like him enough to consider him in this kind of top 5-6 range for the running back position. Now, like I said, I do have Derrick Henry one spot ahead of him, and that ranking is super close for me. I gave the slightest edge to Henry, not just for like what he's shown for durability so far in his year, but the guy has just been like a workhorse for so long, and doing it really in the perfect offense for a player like him to have success. We saw that last year. He had a career year, in terms of rushing grade and a number of his rushing metrics. Like, he's not losing snaps around the goal line either. So he has that touchdown upside in a great offense. But what kept them close for me is knowing just how much, Kyle Shanahan and company want to lean on CMC, especially in the passing game, and that'll be around the goal line as well. My only hesitation, like you, is just how much they can try and maybe should be putting on his plate at this point in his career, considering the injury history and knowing how much not having him in the lineup hurt them last season as well, right? Like, I don't think it's, all of a sudden going to turn into a committee there in San Francisco, or Christian McCaffrey losing out on substantially, key situations in the running game or anything. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him lighten his workload just enough in order to try to keep him fresh and avoid re-injury, because obviously they'll want to make a playoff push this year. So it only makes sense that they don't give him, 20 plus opportunities per game this year in the regular season to, kind of increase their chances of him staying healthy and them making that playoff run. But yeah, like Derrick Henry, Derrick Henry's 30 years old. Christian McCaffrey's 29. But Henry, he's coming off the best and most efficient season of his career, while Christian McCaffrey obviously coming off a very concerning injury-riddled year. So I can't help but feel like, while there's more reward for Christian McCaffrey, he definitely comes with much more risk, right? And I worry about that. The reward isn't necessarily as high as it once was, like that RB1 overall, but still high enough that I think top 5 is in his cards. I have him obviously just outside that range, but I would not be surprised at all if, he bounced back and had this big year. I just think it's starting to become less and less likely as the years go on, obviously, and as the injuries pile up.
How early do you think you would draft him? Like, if you're 10th on the clock and he's there, Nico Collins is there, are you still leaning Collins versus McCaffrey, or where do you think you'd be comfortable drafting him? Because I think I am early 2nd round. And with that, like, potentially having the strategy in mind of, hey, I like someone like Brian Thomas. Thomas probably is going to last to the 2nd round. McCaffrey might not. So maybe I'm picking McCaffrey 11th because I know I can get Brian Thomas in the 2nd round or something like that. But
yeah, I think those are the guys that he's around for me. Like, he's in that fringe kind of 1st to 2nd round spot. Like, I like you mentioned Malik Neighbors. If he's going after Christian McCaffrey, they're both still on the board. I'm definitely taking Malik Neighbors. I think CeeDee Lamb as well. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think, is another player that I have ranked highly for wide receiver. So Brian Thomas, Nico Collins are the guys that I'm considering, where, depending on what I guess the rest of my build is going to be, if I'm going to go wide receiver heavy, I think you can afford to wait on wide receiver a little bit, because it is a deeper position than running back, I believe. So for that reason, there's a chance that I would go Christian McCaffrey. Yeah, maybe not 10, but like in that 12 to 13 range of drafts. Like, if I'm picking back to back, at the end of the 1st round, early 2nd, he's definitely in that range for me. So I agree. He still has that upside. I just don't think it's as high of an upside. So I don't want to go too much earlier than that, but I could see it paying off, where if I'm able to pick another high-end wide receiver right after him to kind of help, create more of a high-end floor for my team, then that's probably where I'd go, if that makes sense.
Fair.
But let's move to our next player of interest here, Nate, and one that we both have as RB11 overall. His ADP is that of RB12 on both Underdog and Sleeper, and that's Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams. Now, for me, Nate, I feel like the past two off seasons, there now including this one, there's been reason to believe that the Rams have wanted to lighten the workload heading into the year, and I tended to believe that at least a little last year with the drafting of Blake Corum and some of the talk coming out of camp and how they were going to use him and use Corum to keep Kyren Williams fresh. That didn't really happen, right? Kyren Williams saw 22.1 opportunities per game. That was a top 5 mark for the position. Took over 300 carries. He found the end zone 14 times as a runner, added 2 more as a receiver. But again, the expectation or at least reason that people believe they should fade Kyren is not just Corum being there, but they also drafted Jarquez Hunter on day 3, who people are relatively excited about. Now, here's the thing. As much as there's a chance that I think Kyren's workload can be afforded to cut down at least some, they've also been, I think, discussing a potential new contract with Williams this offseason, where if that happens, I'm probably less convinced that they'll lighten his workload enough to the point where Corum or Hunter, whoever takes over that, role or cuts into his snaps enough that he's, not an RB1 contender. Obviously, Kyren Williams, he hasn't been the most efficient back with his opportunities. 74.3 rushing grade last year, 4.2 yards per carry last season. But it doesn't really appear that Sean McVay cares at all about that, even with the fumbling issues, right? He continues to trust Kyren at a very high rate. And even them bringing in these other backs, I don't know that I'm willing to, fade him again and expect anything that much less for Kyren and the Rams. And so, considering the price tag, I'm kind of perfectly willing to take a shot on him relatively early here in draft. So obviously, Nate, look, we both have him as RB11. Anything you want to add on Kyren? Any different reasons to feel a little bit more optimistic about him compared to ADP right now?
I mean, clearly we spend too much time together because our rankings have become so close to each other that they're nearly the same. But with Williams, I think it's interesting because the Rams, we've seen it with Sean McVay. He always has one clear rusher who is ahead of everyone else in terms of rushing attempts. I've looked at the differential between the top runner and the backup runners in terms of rushing attempts over the last several seasons. And every other team that's near the top, it was clear that they had a top running back. It's the Titans, but they had Derrick Henry. It was the Cowboys with peak Ezekiel Elliott, the Raiders when they had Josh Jacobs, the Bengals when they had Joe Mixon. Those are the other teams that had a very large difference between their top runner and everyone else in terms of rushing attempts. And then it's the Rams, but the Rams have done it with several different running backs. I wouldn't be surprised if they limit his workload a little bit on passing downs. Sean McVay has had a history of having a third down back at times. We saw this a lot with Malcolm Brown. We saw this a little bit with Darrell Henderson. So I think if Williams is going to lose some time, it'll probably be on third downs, which I don't think really has that negative of an impact on his fantasy production. It probably means he can be more effective on those other downs. So I wouldn't be concerned if that ends up happening. I think there's always the risk that he does just get benched because a different running back is playing better, especially if those fumbles keep going on. But he did have a much higher grade in 2023. He had more fantasy points per game in 2023. Those range of outcomes are still there for him. So that's a big reason why, even though there's a risk of hey, maybe one of these younger running backs just starts playing better, in which case they become the starter, Williams becomes the backup. Williams loses all fantasy value, which is a problem for someone that you're potentially picking in the second round. For me, I think the really interesting thing that I'll especially be trying to delve into these next few weeks now that ADP has started to stabilize a little bit is I'm seeing him right around the end of the second round. And do I want him compared to the other players that are available in that second round, even though I'm perfectly fine with him as the 11th running back off the board? But someone like Trey McBride is available in that range, and I am very high on McBride this season, but am I if I don't pick a tight end there, am I able to get George Kittle later? If I can't get Kittle later, how much worse do my tight ends look versus how much worse do my running backs look later? Jaden Daniels is another player I have right in that range. So that's also a very big decision of if you want to draft a quarterback early. But even some wide receivers like a T. Higgins, a Lad McConkey, two guys that we are fairly confident will be top 20 fantasy wide receivers this season and can be confident as long as they're healthy. They can be someone we can put in our fantasy lineup every week and not have to worry about it the rest of the year. Where Williams, there is more of a risk that he gets benched compared to McConkey or Higgins, where there's no chance that that happens without injuries or something really extreme happening. And then even along with that, we both have Kenneth Walker one spot ahead of Williams, and Walker's ADP is a bit lower than that. So are we just comfortable taking Walker later? And a lot of that probably depends on where we're picking. So even though I feel comfortable about Williams at 11th, I think that's fine. That's right around where ADP has him in terms of rankings. I'm not sure how much Williams I'm going to have this season if I want to take players at different positions where Williams would usually be picked.
Yeah, it's a good point. And like I was going to say the same thing about, Kenneth Walker as well, being in that same kind of ranking for us. Like he's somebody where if we want to go for another position near the end of that second round, like we can probably afford to, because we like Kenneth Walker a little bit more, and we could grab him in, round 3 or wherever it happens to be. I mean, potentially later based on some of the other ADP that I'm seeing as well, right? So there's ways to kind of make up for that if you're concerned about the risk for Kyren Williams. But I mean, you look at like you said, even his 2023 season, just how well he played. Like, yeah, I mentioned, he wasn't as efficient in 2024, but 2023, there's reason for him to, kind of regress at least more to his mean between these last 2 seasons, especially if he could cut down on the fumbles. And if he does cut down on the fumbles, it doesn't seem like Sean McVay will go away from him, right? So there's that part of it as well, where I think there's a pretty safe floor for Kyren Williams, assuming that he doesn't get benched, which obviously that is a concern for a lot of running backs. But I think just based on how Sean McVay has trusted him in the past, I think we could feel pretty comfortable with him here in 2025. Okay, let's move to the next name I think worth mentioning here, Nate. Another similar ranking for us between the two of us. It's Alvin Kamara at RB16. He's going as RB20 on Underdog. He is going as RB16 on Sleeper, RB17 on ESPN. The Saints, they did just sign Cam Akers as well, but any concerns for Kamara heading into year 9 of his NFL career?
There are some concerns, but there's also some reasons to be excited about him. I'm pretty curious to see how he does. I know these past couple seasons I've been down on him because his grades weren't as good as they were earlier in his career. And we knew that there were those couple of years where he basically had no competition for touches. He had Mark Ingram at the end of his career and nothing much outside of that. And they started to get more players. They got Kendre Miller. They got Williams, who didn't really work out for them. So it's been Kamara, and he's been pretty stable in terms of his grades in recent seasons. So even if he's not the same player he once was, he's still been someone who's been good enough to be a starting NFL running back. He has the 25th best rushing grade over the past 3 seasons, the 16th best receiving grade for a running back these past 3 seasons. So he has played decently well, even if he's not this all-pro player he once was. And then I think the offensive line can be better this year, which is probably my biggest reason for optimism for him. I know they dealt with a number of injuries last season, most notably Eric McCoy, their center, who graded extremely well in the run game, but missed over half the season. I believe he should be back and healthy this year. They continue investing in the offensive line, something that the Saints feels like they've been doing for the last 2 decades of like consistently spending first round picks on offensive linemen. So excited about the offensive line and that potentially helping Kamara. And then they added Kellen Moore as the new head coach. He has a lot of experience with top fantasy running backs, Saquon Barkley last year, for example. But that also comes with the big concern for Kamara, and that I could see his receiving production going down because Kellen Moore, every stop he's been at, the top running back hasn't had the same receiving production as he had either before or after. Saquon Barkley did not have the same receiving production last year as he had in other points of his career. He had Austin Ekeler the year before that, and Ekeler did not do nearly as much in the receiving game as he had before or after. Ezekiel Elliott as well was more of a receiver, and then Kellen Moore came and he stopped being as much of a receiving running back. So I could see Kamara's receiving production going down, even if his rushing efficiency goes up. So a lot of it, to me, I think depends on how good the Saints are doing. If they're constantly behind in games, can't run the ball very much, and aren't going to throw the ball to the running back very much, then Kamara probably deserves to go a little bit lower than this. But as long as the Saints can stay somewhat competitive, Kamara will probably be a pretty focal point of the run game and ideally have some success in the run game too.
Yeah, I would hope so, right? And like, I'm not, overly optimistic about this Saints offense here for 2025, but I do like the potential for Kamara because there's not like this great competition for him for touches in that backfield. And the receiving profile for him has obviously been his greatest asset right now. Like, he led the position in targets last year with 87. He was second in targets in 2023 as well, despite missing like 4 games. He's had over 80 targets in 6 of his 8 seasons so far, which is pretty wild for a running back. And it plays a massive part in his fantasy potential. So like you said, there's a chance that the receiving production goes down a bit, but I think he's still going to be very, very involved, knowing that that's such a strong suit for him and such a big part of his game and how they can get that offense going. And like I said, you look at the Saints roster this year, like, it's not great. The backfield specifically, like, yes, we're still waiting on that Kendre Miller potential to hit. I don't know that it will. We'll see. Cam Akers, he's not been anywhere near good enough in recent years to kind of be considered like a legitimate threat. And yeah, that maybe they're rolling with Tyler Shuck at quarterback as well. So the offense probably not going to be great. But the thing I think that where, even with Kellen Moore being there, I think the thing that could be a part of the Tyler Shuck experience or offense here is, to make things as easy as possible for him in year one, is having that back that he can check down to and dump off to in the form of Alvin Kamara, and somebody that they're probably going to need to utilize as often as possible. I just have to imagine that it'll be drilled into Shuck's head, like, when you're in trouble, looking for an outlet out of the backfield, and Kamara is going to be the big beneficiary for that, right? Like, especially in full PPR leagues, like where he may very well lead the position in targets once again, even with a decrease in receiving role. But obviously, the other thing too with Kamara is that he has dealt with injuries. He's missed time quite a bit. He's never necessarily been the most efficient runner either. I still just don't think like Akers, Kendre are going to eat into that role enough to keep him from being a viable fantasy starter as long as he's out there. I could see this kind of being like the last dance for Kamara as well, right? To kind of push for an RB1 finish maybe one more time. I mean, look, the guy missed 2 games last year during the fantasy season, and it still finished as the RB8 overall. So there's, I think reason to believe that he can get back there again in 2025. But yeah, I guess, RB16, we're slightly more optimistic than ADP, but I think that's about the right spot for him, considering everything that he's given us here for fantasy over his career. So yeah, still feeling relatively optimistic, I guess.
I'll add, I think Akers signing with the team, if anything, I was a little more optimistic about Kamara, because that told me that maybe they aren't as excited about Kendre Miller. I know they said they're giving him a blank slate, and he has graded well when given the opportunity. But if anything, I was like, okay, maybe they do trust Kamara more and aren't as worried about Kendre Miller. So there was that. And I do think outside of the quarterback position, this can be a very good offense. They were scoring 40 plus points per game those first 2 weeks of last season. Mm-hmm. They were excellent. And then everyone got injured. And now outside of the quarterback position, basically everyone's back. They got the offensive line back, the offensive line, not one of the top couple offensive lines in the league, but one of the better offensive lines. Chris Olave is good. Rashid Shaheed's a good receiver. Kamara's a good running back. The tight ends are decent enough. So you have all of the pieces of an offense outside of knowing if the quarterback's going to be good. So a whole lot depends on how good whoever wins the quarterback job ends up playing this year.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I remember we were surprised just how good this offense was to start last season. But like you said, yeah, the injuries obviously killed that. And look, they believe in Tyler Shuck enough potentially, so he could surprise us as well. You're right, and there's definitely pieces there that could work out and help this offense quite a bit. But let's go from one longtime fantasy asset, Nate, to a brand new one here in 2025. It's rookie Quinshon Judkins of the Cleveland Brown that draws our attentions next here. And you have him as RB22. I have him as RB21. Underdog ADP has him as RB23, and Sleeper has him as RB27. So we're both higher on the rookie than ADP and believe that he can be a weekly fantasy starter for us in 2025. Now, for me, I think it's fairly simple in that, Judkins is immediately the best running back on this Browns roster. He's the clear favorite to lead the backfield in touches, and he should be much more effective than anyone that they had running the ball last year between, Jerome Ford and then obviously Nick Chubb coming off an injury. Now, Judkins, he comes out of college with an elite 95.2 career rushing grade. The Browns obviously spent a second-round pick on him out of Ohio State, and while this team they were unable to run the ball last year, I think they should only increase in that rushing potential in 2025 by bringing in Judkins and then even Dylan Sampson to an extent as well. Now, this offensive line is a problem. They were not good last year. In fact, they were one of the worst in the league when it came to run blocking. So that has to improve. Ideally, the entire offense will need to improve, but it should, it helps to have the fresh legs of a talented rookie out of the backfield who should be able to make the most of his opportunities, again, considering the profile coming out. And I think he will get a lot of opportunities to put up that consistent RB2 production on a team that even, we don't think they're going to be very good in 2025. I think that matters less when the projection is for Judkins to dominate the kind of rushing opportunities, even with Jerome Ford there. Like I don't think Jerome Ford is likely to be anything more than the team's RB3 at this point. He even took a pay cut this offseason just to stay with the team and, knowing he'd have a reduced role as well. So, if Sampson takes on maybe the bulk of the passing downs, which feels likely as a smaller, quicker back, I still think Judkins will have some value there in the passing game, but the main thing will be dominating, kind of the early down, short yardage, goal line work for the team. And that's a workload that I think I could get behind here for a rookie to be a consistent fantasy starter. So, thinking about Judkins' rookie year potential, Nate, do you feel like the more likely outcome for Judkins is maybe to crack that top 20 or top 15 or fall outside the top 24 backs? What do you think here?
I think if anything, he would go up a little bit from this. For me, there's a pretty clear tier break after this. Of everyone above this, I expect to be have a very large role in their offense, where basically everyone below this, I expect to be in more of a committee, or it's unclear who's going to be the clear starter. But I think Judkins is going to see the majority of the carries. Outside of injury, I don't see much of a scenario where that doesn't happen. They've talked about his ability to play on all three downs. He has graded well in every situation. I wouldn't be surprised if he's not playing much on third downs, but third downs aren't the most necessary thing for a fantasy running back. A lot of the receiving that happens for running backs happens on first and second down. So I think Judkins can be a part of the passing game, even if he's not playing those third down snaps, whether it's Sampson taking those snaps or Ford taking those snaps. I do expect Sampson to be somewhat part of the offense, but everyone in the teens and 20s, I expect there to be another running back who's getting significant playing time, at least somewhat, but I still expect Judkins to be at least 60% of the offensive snaps, at least 60% of the carries. Like you said, there's the concerns about the offense in general. There's concerns about the offensive line, which I'm not sure the offensive line is going to be getting much better this year. So even though we have guys ahead of him like Mixon and Hall that I'm concerned about, Judkins is still lower than them for me because of the concerns about the offense in general and just how many touchdowns can Judkins score this season. But I still expect him to get the volume and be someone that you can put in your fantasy starting lineup, because in fantasy volume's king, Judkins is going to get the volume. And we also believe Judkins is a good runner, so he might be able to play well despite the team. And another thought of him with the Browns, of they've had this committee for years and years, but that might have more to do with Nick Chubb than it does anything else. They just might not have wanted Chubb to play on third downs, and he's been the running back for several years. But going back to Stefanski's time with the Vikings, Dalvin Cook played 68% of offensive snaps when healthy. So he's been a part of offenses where there's been one clear guy. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Browns do not have that same kind of running back rotation that we saw for years, with Nick Chubb getting the early down work and often Kareem Hunt getting that third down work, or more recently Jerome Ford.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you. Like, I could definitely see Judkins being somebody that starts to rise here. Even in my rankings, like I think I can afford to have him higher. We'll see what happens with some of the guys that I have ranked ahead of him, but I don't think that there's necessarily potential for like negative news coming out of training camp regarding him, where I think, some of the news or usage may be coming out of the preseason or training camp for stuff or for guys like Breece Hall or maybe even Joe Mixon, right? Like that can be concerning enough where maybe we do start to prefer like a Quinshon Judkins, whose role looks pretty solidified here and with the potential to kind of be that workhorse in Cleveland as well. So yeah, like Quinshon Judkins quite a bit and feeling pretty optimistic about him for his rookie year.
RJ Harvey, another one that could
yeah.
be going down just depending on J.K. Dobbins. So there's a couple of these running backs out of him, including that fellow rookie.
Definitely. All right, before we go on to the rest of our running backs here, I do want to let you guys know that this episode is brought to you by Fabric by Gerber Life. Now is still a great time to reevaluate financial goals, not just for yourself, but for your kids. Now is the perfect time to make sure your kids are on a path toward a solid financial future. A kid's investment account from Fabric by Gerber Life is quick and simple to set up and lets you invest in their future now for education, big milestones, and more. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a kid's investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. Kids can't invest when they're minors, but a kid's investment account allows you to invest on their behalf now, giving their investments more time to grow. It's all online, and setting up an account could take you just 5 minutes. Then you can manage your child's account and monitor their investments right from your phone. Funds can be used for nearly anything, benefiting your child from tuition and tutors to music classes. And when they're adults and out on their own, they can use the funds for anything they need. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/fantasy. That's meetfabric.com/fantasy, MEET fabric.com/fantasy. Portfolios managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors, Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. Okay, another running back that we seem to be optimistic about right now, at least compared to the ADP, is Chicago Bears running back DeAndre Swift, who dodged a ton of bullets this offseason in the form of legitimate competition. So, Nate, can Swift still be the one to trust for fantasy? Because it seems like drafters are hesitant, at least right now, to embrace the potential, as he's going as RB27 on Underdog, RB29 on Sleeper. We both have him as RB23 because it feels like he's in a great position to succeed here in 2025. What do you think, Nate?
Oh, yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if ADPs are a little bit slow to adapt this time of year with not many drafts going on. So, like, people were concerned J.K. Dobbins was going to sign there, and now he's not. People were concerned Nick Chubb was going to sign there, and now he's not. So and even like Cam Akers was the top free agent running back before he signed, and we just said that we weren't that concerned about him with the Saints. So there's really not that many options left outside of trades for running backs. So it looks like Swift is going to be the lead guy on a team with a much improved offensive line. I'll be very curious to see how that rotation shakes out. Hopefully sometime during training camp, we'll get a better idea of how they plan on using Swift and their other running backs. Roschon Johnson is probably the guy that I'm most concerned about. And I think Johnson, if anything, would have that early down role. So even if Swift isn't the starter, he could be more of the Jahmyr Gibbs role, which is what he had in Ben Johnson's offense at 1 year, in which he was probably the most effective on a per play basis as a runner, but received the fewest carries per game in his career. So he still had a decent enough fantasy season that year. It's hard for me to see a scenario now where Swift isn't heavily involved in the offense outside of a trade, but I'll be curious to see what goes on. I know people are excited about their 7th round rookie who's gotten some hype, but we also haven't seen one of those late round rookies really pan out since James Robinson that 1 year. Like, we were excited about a number of 6th round running backs last year, and Atlanta just yesterday cut their 6th round running back from the 2024 draft, Jace McMillan. So McClellan, however you pronounce his last name.
Yep.
But it's a scenario where he might be running the ball a lot. He might be catching the ball a lot. My only concern is, like, there's Breece Hall, there's Kyren Williams, there's ETN, there's a number of Cook's another one, a lot of running backs who are in the last year of their contract that partway into the season, if things aren't working out for whatever reason, they could go to Chicago. A lot of them are receiving running backs. So even if it's Swift and Roschon Johnson splitting carries, if they add another running back, that running back might replace more of what Swift does than what Johnson does. So I'll be curious to see how things go, but every he's survived every bullet so far, like you said. So it looks like he's going to have a decent role. So he could very well be going much higher than 23 if we find out that they're thinking Swift might be the feature running back in this offense, with how good we think this offense will be and with how much they invested in the offensive line. If we find out Swift is going to be the main running back, like, I don't think top 12 is out of the question for where to rank him if we think that's going to be his role.
Yeah, look, it's definitely possible. I mean, Swift doing his best Neo from the Matrix impression here, dodging every bullet possible on his path to becoming maybe an RB1 here, because like, look, we talked about it a ton earlier this offseason. Like, we were fully ready to embrace whichever rookie running back this team was going to draft on the first 2 days of the NFL draft, because it certainly felt like they were in, you know, a rumored destination or a favorite to get there, because they had this new regime coming in. They greatly improved the offense and the offensive line. The one position that they didn't address was the running back position. So that at least should tell us that maybe they do feel comfortable enough in Swift that he'll be their guy in 2025. Obviously, like you said, Ben Johnson has familiarity with Swift during his time there in Detroit, but he was also, I think, part of the staff that felt good enough to trade him away. So like, that's another reason that it felt like maybe they weren't going to go into the season with Swift as RB1, but here we are, right? It's kind of hard to ignore the evidence here, where even though Swift wouldn't necessarily be like our first choice to lead this backfield, and who knows, maybe he wasn't Chicago's first choice either, but they were left with no choice. So as much as this would have been an amazing opportunity for, you know, a Quinshon Judkins or Travion Henderson or RJ Harvey, whoever got drafted on day 2 this year, it's just as good of an opportunity for DeAndre Swift to step into a great role on a much improved offense that is going to be able to run the ball. And Swift is the favorite to lead them in touches. So we don't have to get, you know, excited to say that, you know, he's you know, to rank him in that top 12, but where he is right now in that RB2 range, I absolutely feel good about him there, because maybe could be one of the better values in drafts right now for the position. Like you said, there's a chance that they like Roschon Johnson enough to play that kind of David Montgomery type role. I like Roschon Johnson fine, but so far in the league, that hasn't been what NFL coaching staffs have thought of him, right? Like, even the one that drafted him on day 3 a couple years ago, like, he never had more than 81 carries in a season, and still very much profiles like a backup, not a, you know, a David Montgomery potential lead back type who has almost always taken 200 carries per year, right? So yeah, I really like the potential here for Swift. You know, he's not somebody that I necessarily thought I would be excited about going into this year, but one that I think, you know, you look at the situation around him and the offense that he's on, and got to feel pretty good about him heading into 2025 right now.
Yeah, like even though Roschon Johnson hasn't had the volume, I could see it for him, because a lot of what he's done is that short yardage work. So I know his yards per carry has not been good, but a lot of that is because he's been taking those just short yardage, try to get the first down, decent enough rate at getting the first down. And that's kind of the philosophy of what they've used David Montgomery for, is like, get those short yardage, beat up the defense so that the receiving back can then play against a more worn down defense and have success against them. And that's kind of the strategy that works. So even though Roschon Johnson hasn't had the volume before, even if he has more volume, I don't think he's going to have excellent efficiency, which might not be the greatest thing for fantasy, but he could also be the one scoring a touchdown every single game like we've seen David Montgomery, and that's been huge for Montgomery's production. So like, we both have Montgomery lower on this list than ADP, because we're like, maybe he's not going to get the touchdowns this year with the new coaching staff.
Yeah, look, it's possible, right? I mean, we saw it with even Jamal Williams, right? Like, he had that huge year in Detroit where he was just getting a ton of touchdowns and opportunities around the goal line. So maybe there is hope. And look, as somebody that's still clinging on to a lot of Roschon Johnson shares in Dynasty right now because of that potential this year, I do believe that there is at least a chance that it happens. But yeah, it's still, either way, like, it's still hard to kind of ignore just how optimistic things look for DeAndre Swift right now. Okay, next up, Nate, let's talk a little bit about the Pittsburgh Steelers backfield, specifically Jaylen Warren, who we both have ranked a little higher than rookie Caleb Johnson right now. Warren's going as RB33 on both Underdog and Sleeper. We both have him as RB29. Now, I know that, you know, people, the hope around Jaylen Warren taking on a larger role has often been a narrative heading into this season, and it hasn't quite resulted in the fantasy potential that it could be. And to be fair, last year was overall a pretty disappointing season in terms of his rushing, like career low in rushing grade, yards per carry, explosive run rates, all that kind of stuff. But with Najee Harris off to Los Angeles and the team signing Warren with his RFA tender, like he once again kind of finds himself in a position for a pretty strong opportunity on one of the league's most run heavy offenses. Like even with the addition of Caleb Johnson through the draft, like Arthur Smith's offenses have ranked no worse than top 5 in run rate in each of the past 3 seasons, creating a lot of opportunity for his running backs. And Caleb Johnson, for me, like he's going to get his touches as well, but the reason that I have him ranked one spot behind Warren is that I don't think he fully takes on the entirety of that early down rushing role in Pittsburgh. And I think Warren should still get enough touches there on top of what he can provide as a receiver to be kind of the likely best bet for fantasy in Pittsburgh's backfield right now. Like Warren has averaged a little more than 60 targets per year in each of the past 2 seasons. Meanwhile, he gets Aaron Rodgers at quarterback this year, who threw 111 passes in the direction of his running backs last season, which was the 3rd most for the year. And then the season that he was last healthy prior to that, which was 2022, he threw 108 passes to his running backs, which was 4th most. So there's a tendency there for Rodgers as well. And as much as we like Alvin Kamara for, maybe his receiving potential, Warren might be getting a nice little boost himself for arguably the biggest workload of his career, at least as a receiver anyways, which I think is huge for his PPR potential in 2025. So I like Warren still this year. Like he's going in that kind of RB3 range. I think that's a fine spot to take a shot on him. But how about you, Nate? Because you're always a Jaylen Warren fan, and considering you almost always have him higher than ADP, what are your thoughts on him heading into 2025?
So he was 22nd in fantasy points per game in 2023 for running backs, and it was a little bit lower last season, but he was dealing with a number of injuries early in the season, missed some time, and then wasn't as effective returning from injury. As the season progressed, he started to get better and better. So over that second half of last year, he was 25th in fantasy points per game, so he was doing pretty well. Caleb Johnson should be a better running back than Najee Harris was in this offense, but Arthur Smith has said he wants to run the ball 500 times this season, which is something that they've been doing so in Arthur Smith's offenses. So like you said, I wouldn't be surprised if Jaylen Warren is second on the team in terms of rushing attempts, but makes up for it by a lot with his receiving, since we don't know exactly how much of this offense is going to be Arthur Smith's offense, how much of this is going to be Aaron Rodgers' offense. But like you were saying, it kind of works out either way of if this is Arthur Smith's offense where the running backs are getting the ball all the time, then there's enough room for both Warren and Johnson to see plenty of carries this season. And if this does look more like one of Aaron Rodgers' offense, then to me, Jaylen Warren is more like the Aaron Jones, where Caleb Johnson is more like the A.J. Dillon. And Dillon is someone who, at his peak, was having a 90-plus rushing grade for us, but wasn't getting much of the receiving work, where Aaron Jones was getting all of the receiving work, and Aaron Jones was the one to have in fantasy. So even though I think it's perfectly fine to take a shot on Johnson as well, he should have plenty of carries this season. I still think Warren is the one I would rather have for his receiving production, especially in PPR leagues, which the rankings that we're showing now, at least for me, this is PPR rankings, and I will have Warren lower in non-PPR rankings, but I think he is someone who should have a fairly good fantasy season. Both running backs, because they're competing for snaps against each other, and we expect both of them to see significant playing time throughout the season, it's hard to view either one of them as a top 10 potential running back because they're splitting the backfield. So even though I might trust either one of them to be in my fantasy starting lineup throughout the season, it's because I don't think they have the upside to be all that much higher than that they're this low on the list rather than a little bit higher, because some of these other running backs, Isaiah Pacheco is someone who stands out on the screen right now. There's plenty of risk with him because he didn't play very well last season, but if he's playing well, they no longer have their third down back from last season. I think Pacheco does have the potential to be a top 12 fantasy running back this season, even though I think there's also more risk that he does worse than both Warren and Johnson this year if things aren't going well for Pacheco.
Yeah, that's a good call. And yeah, I mean, look, even Caleb Johnson, like I think it's fine to take a shot on him. Like if you like him enough over Jaylen Warren, you like the idea of this, untapped rookie potential that we haven't seen before, that, maybe he does take over the backfield in a larger role. I definitely get wanting to target that upside and knowing that, even Jalen Warren, like he's not going to fully take over the backfield where, Caleb Johnson as a rookie, if he's good enough or, the team spent a day 2 pick on him, that maybe that there's a chance that he has the larger role. But I just think that, based on kind of the evidence that we've seen from these guys, I think there is more reason to believe in Jalen Warren slightly right now, at least for PPR, like you said. So yeah, I like both options in Pittsburgh just for how often they're going to run the ball. But like you said, it's not necessarily a situation where I'm expecting them to be, RB1 or maybe even RB2 for us in our fantasy seasons, but definitely some flex value in there for sure. All right, next up, Nate. Speaking of players you are a fan of, Jordan Mason, now of the Minnesota Vikings, going as RB32. Where did he go? Oh, he's already on that screen. There you go. Yeah. He's going as RB2 on Underdog, RB43 on Sleeper. You're much higher than him than even me on him and higher on him for Sleeper for sure. But you have him as RB28, even ahead of Jalen Warren. So what's got you bullish on Jordan Mason for 2025?
A lot of it is his talent. He has been one of the highest graded running backs since he's entered the league. A lot of this has been on smaller sample sizes, but even last season, the first 6 weeks of the season when he was a starter, he was scoring the 6th most fantasy points for running backs at that time. It was surrounded by a strong San Francisco offense, but now he's surrounded by a strong Minnesota offense. Aaron Jones is someone who has dealt with a lot of injuries recently, is at the age where he's probably going to be retiring in these next couple seasons. And Mason's game has not been as a run or as a receiver, where Aaron Jones, one of his strengths has been as a receiver. So I think this is going to be a pretty clear 2-back committee where Mason is getting a lot of these carries and Aaron Jones is getting a lot of the receiving work. And like Mason, he has shown recently that he is much better at making big plays, has been twice as likely to have a run go for 15 or more yards than Aaron Jones in these last couple seasons. So I think because of that, we will see Mason not just get some of the short yardage work, some of the goal line work, which should lead to a lot of touchdowns, but also a lot of the just everyday normal carries as well, because I think he's going to be more effective at it than Aaron Jones. And I think this is going to be a very strong Vikings offense around him. We know they have one of the top receiving groups in the league. TJ Hawkinson should be a year further removed from his injury, so I expect Hawkinson to be among the top tight ends this year. They reworked a lot of their interior offensive line, which should lead to some improvements in the run game as well this season. So the offensive line should be good. A lot of it does depend on the quarterback position, but we have seen this offense be successful with whatever quarterback's been on the field. And there's a chance that J.J. McCarthy is the best quarterback that they have had recently. We've seen what Sam Darnold has done with teams outside of Minnesota, and it hasn't been great. We've seen last year what Kirk Cousins did when he left Minnesota, and he got benched during the season. So we've seen quarterbacks who in other systems haven't been great, and then in Minnesota's system is awesome. So even if McCarthy's, if his leg's not 100%, and he's not running as much, then I still think he's going to be a perfectly fine passer to lead this offense and could be the best version of this Vikings offense we've seen in recent seasons. So part of it's the thought of a successful Minnesota team, but if there's winning a lot, that should lead to Mason scoring a lot of touchdowns this season. So I know he's risky, but we're in this range where all of these running backs we're talking about are in committees. There's been talk of Tajay Spears getting more work recently. So Tony Pollard, someone we have in this range, might be losing some of his time. Isaiah Pacheco, Kansas City has a lot of different running backs behind Pacheco now, and he was not playing well last season. David Montgomery, we know he's the number 2 option in Detroit's offense. So this is definitely a range where we have 2 players in a committee, and I think I'd rather have either one of the Vikings running backs than even some other committees that we have after this, like the Giants running backs or the Patriots running backs.
Yeah, for sure. Look, like you said, it's risky, but I don't think the risk is so great that, he's a bad pick in this range at all, right? Like I fully understand the appeal of Mason, especially considering where Aaron Jones is at in his career. Obviously, comes with that injury history that you mentioned. Never great for a 30-year-old running back. So there's risk in investing too much in like Aaron Jones as well. But I believe we both have Aaron Jones as RB24 right now. And the reason that I like Aaron Jones, like even at this stage in his career, is that whenever he's been on the field, like he's been pretty good and effective. Even last year, like a career low 76.5 rushing grade. It was also a career low for Jordan Mason in 2024 at 76.1. But they did bring back Aaron Jones on a 2-year deal worth, I think, $10 million per year. So pretty decent sized contract where I think they're going to still rely on him quite a bit, at least for this season. Now, Mason, for sure, like he had that lead back role in San Francisco for a little while Christian McCaffrey was out to start the year, and he was great in that role. Had a couple top 5 finishes in there for fantasy during those weeks, and was at the very least like a weekly starter. But that was getting nearly 20 carries per game as well, like often much more than that. So unless Jones misses time, like I don't feel as good about Mason getting that level of volume. Like even if he eats into Jones's snaps, like on the early downs, like enough to provide some flex value on occasion, I worry that as long as Jones is in there, like Jones is still going to get a pretty decent workload on early downs. But I do think Jordan Mason, one of, if not the best handcuff for this season, like thinking about, like you mentioned, some of the guys that I currently have ahead of him, the Steelers running backs, I think will just be more involved altogether. Same thing with the two New England backs from Ramondre Stevenson and Travion Henderson. Then I still think like Javonte Williams will lead Dallas's backfield. So there's probably bigger opportunity there, whether he could hold it for the entire season. We'll see about that. J.K. Dobbins should get a decent amount of rushing work in Denver. Where I like his potential to get that early down work a little bit more than Jordan Mason getting the early down work in Minnesota. But, then I think about the Giants running backs as well, who I also have a little bit ahead, like both Tyrone Tracy and Cam Sketebo, where I think they get the edge because one of them should win a larger role. Like I think that'll be Sketebo, while the other will at least start with the larger role, which I think could be Tyrone Tracy. And then, Mason comes in a little bit after that for me, ahead of Najee Harris, who I think is, firmly behind Amarian Hampton. He's ahead of Zach Charbonnet as well, who's, again, same thing, firmly behind Kenneth Walker. Tajay Spears behind Tony Pollard. So I have him kind of as this best of that bunch of clear handcuffs. So it was a little bit harder for me to move Mason up, but I definitely see, like you mentioned, I like what you said last year, or just a minute ago, based on Mason's last year and Aaron Jones, again, being in that potential later stage of his career where he could get hurt again. He did play every game last year, though, Aaron Jones. So I do think that he's a nice fit here for Kevin O'Connell's offense as well. So I came away with not as big of a role projected for Mason, but I could definitely see the path there, like you said.
Yeah, like I'm envisioning like 10 to 15 carries a game, but part of this is also the touchdown potential. Since I think Mason will get those goal line snaps, I think he'll get the short yardage work. The Vikings, their coaching staff recently has probably been the team most fluid in their running back roles and how they've rotated their running backs. We saw it change a lot from one week to the next, both last season as well as the previous season, especially when they had Madison and Akers and didn't know who they wanted to have. So we saw a lot of changes where most other situations are pretty stable in terms of how they use their running backs. So I think Mason gets those goal line touches. And I think a big part is the difference in quality of offenses, where the Vikings last season were a top 10 offense in terms of points scored. And I think they can be even better than where they were last year, where the Giants second fewest points scored, the Patriots, the third fewest points scored. So even after getting maybe a little bit more volume, I don't think they have that same touchdown potential. So for me, it's the touchdown potential that puts them ahead, even if Mason's getting a little less work. And I do think the Vikings will be winning games, in which case they will be more likely to rest Jones when they're winning those games because they want him for that playoff run. Yep. So I think Mason in those games where the Vikings are winning can see more work than Jones, especially in those games.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very fair way of looking at it too, right? And look, to be honest, like Aaron Jones, he played every game last year, probably due for an injury as well, like as bad as that is to say, right? Like just knowing his history. So there's like this really high upside here with Jordan Mason, where if he does take over that RB1 role or Aaron Jones misses any amount of time, like on top of the potential, like you said, like he's worth, I think, taking a shot on in this range here, if you're a believer on him. So yeah, I like it quite a bit. But let's do one more, Nate, and we'll have to roll a little further down the ranks to get there. Despite the former RB1 name value, we're going to go to Washington Commanders running back Austin Ekeler. I have him as RB 45. You have him as RB 51. He's not a player that I think, I feel too strongly about this offseason, since I'm basically in between on his ADP of like 49 on Underdog and 44 on Sleeper. And for me, there's still some opportunity there in that Commanders backfield, with Brian Robinson still handling kind of the bulk of the early down work and Ekeler taking more of the passing down opportunities. Like last year, Ekeler saw about 10 opportunities per game between his carries and targets, which, for this range of drafts, like I'm not going to be too upset about, even if it comes in slightly less than that, because there are guys who are probably still projecting for less than that in, Trey Benson. Obviously he has the upside of the handcuff of taking over for James Conner, but Ray Davis, Kendre Miller, Isaac Warendo, Rico Dowdle, those are the kind of guys that he's going around. And I think that lighter workload at least worked some to Eckler's benefit last year as well. Like he was more efficient with his touches than the previous year, averaging about 1.2 fantasy points per touch, which was a high mark. He averaged 11.6 points per game on 3.5 targets per game. So it's not that I'm completely out on him, especially at cost, because I don't think there's like a ton of downside in grabbing him at this point in drafts if you need a flex type option in those deeper leagues, which is really kind of his entire value right now, right? He's not a true handcuff. He's more of a role player / deep league type option. That's the kind of format that I'd spend a pick on him, knowing I'll have a bunch of starting spots to fill. Otherwise, I'll just kind of continue to wait a bit and grab like some late round handcuffs near the end of drafts who could have some like waiver wire potential if something happens early in the year to one of their starters. So yeah, basically like the only real format that I'll take a swing on Ekeler in typical redraft leagues is those deeper formats where I might not, I might not see like, I think he might just be more flex production, basically. Otherwise, he's not all that valuable to me. But where are you at with Ekeler, Nate? Because you have him lower than I do at the moment.
Yeah, I think Ekeler is kind of the perfect example of why when you're doing your drafts, you want to look at rankings over projections, because Ekeler is going to be projected to score more than the 51st or 45th total points, because he is going to have that third down role in the offense. He will play at least a little bit on early downs. I don't think he's going to see quite as many opportunities as he saw last season when he was healthy, because they added Deebo Samuel in the offense. And I think Samuel is going to get some of that work as a receiver out of the backfield, some of those shorter passes. We saw him do those similar things in San Francisco. And Cliff Kingsbury, we saw him do a lot of those things with Rondale Moore when he was in Arizona. So Deebo Samuel is kind of a upgraded option to Rondale Moore. And I think that's part of how he will be used in the offense. That's a little bit how Ekeler was used in the offense last year. There were a lot of early down snaps where it was both Robinson and Ekeler on the field at the same time, so they could have Ekeler do some of that hybrid work. And I think instead this year we'll see Deebo Samuel take some of those snaps instead of Ekeler. So I don't think in a normal situation where everyone's healthy, you can start Ekeler, because I don't think I'll be getting that many opportunities. He'll be better than other third down backs, but it's only if you're in one of these deeper leagues where you have a reason where 40 running backs are starting in the league any given week. Unless you're in that kind of scenario, and in my rankings, I'm generally thinking of 12-team normal-ish leagues. So I don't see you starting him in a 12-team league when everyone's healthy. And then even if Robinson does suffer a major injury, I think Ekeler will see a slight increase in workload. But Jeremy McNichols graded really well. Chris Rodriguez graded really well. Both younger running backs who I think would step up more so if Robinson were to suffer an injury. So even though Ekeler would move up a little bit, I don't think he would move up all the way to the point where I'm comfortable starting him. So I don't see a scenario where you're starting him where other running backs in this range, like Ray Davis, if James Cook suffers an injury or his holdout situation lasts a long time or something like that, then you're starting Ray Davis in your fantasy league because he's taking James Cook's role and doing the stuff that James Cook does, where I don't see that with Ekeler. So I still have Ekeler ahead because there's those weird leagues where it's really big and you might need Ekeler as that flex play, particularly when bye weeks hit. You're more likely to start Ekeler than Davis in just a normal random week. But outside of that, I don't see him in your lineup, so I'm probably not going to be drafting him.
Yeah, he doesn't feel like he, even really qualifies as that sleeper, right? He's really just that kind of deep league option, I think, more than anything, and really just returning flex value more than anything else is even in there. So I think there's definitely a lot of other players in this range of drafts where if you're feeling good about, the potential handcuff value of some of these running backs, or, a rookie sleeper or something like that could earn a larger role, like I think you take your shots there over somebody like Austin Ekeler. Because at this point in his career, it feels like there's just not a ton of fantasy value there. So yeah, I could afford to probably even move him even lower than this at this point as well. Thank you all for tuning in. And if you want to see the full larger list of rankings from Nate and I, head over to pff.com, where all those articles will be. My running back tiers article literally just dropped out there today, so go check that out now. Nate, thank you for doing this. Please remind everybody what you have going on at pff.com this week.
Oh, yeah, I've been grinding player profiles for the past 2 months or so. So every running back we talked about today, every running back that we glossed over in the rankings today, I have a full article about each one of those running backs. So if you want to know my opinion on any of the players we didn't talk about today, or even more detail about the players that we did talk about today, those are all up on the website right now.
Nice. Yeah, check it out. And then, as for me, quarterback tiers, running back tiers, tight end tiers, wide receiver tiers, those will all be up on the site from me this week. And they'll include write-ups and rationale on the players within those tiers as well. But yeah, other than that, we'll be back next week with probably another rankings episode. So be sure to tune in